You've been on record. I think the last time you came on Clips and Dip, you called him, what was the word?
Loser, I think.
A loser. Yeah, loser. Yeah. I wanted you to expand and expound on that and why you would say such inflammatory language about Paul George and what you mean by that, and give you the opportunity to explain, because it's not like you're the only guy who has said that. Welcome into another Clippers Talk. I'm Adam Oslin. Another one. Move over DJ Khaled or whoever says that. Yes, they continue. Stack them deep and sell them cheap. That's what I always say. That's what we're doing here on Clippers Talk. I don't care that it's Labor Day weekend. This is a labor of love. And we have more content to bring you here on the new YouTube channel side. It's always been a podcast, at least for the last 7 years or so. Now, if you want to see me, if you want to see some of the graphics I put up for a Friday show where I talked about Ivica Zubac and that new contract extension with graphics and videos, you can go to @ClippersTalk on YouTube for that. I'm at Follow Adam A. Welcome in, everyone. I do have some interesting news coming up later on the show and some future episodes later this week. But first, I want to bring in our guest. You can already see him. It's a little bit awkward because I haven't figured that part out yet. But we have Lucas Hann. Don't call him Hann, from the 213 Hoops Empire, of which he is the proprietor and owner of. We've had many of his contemporaries on, many of his coworkers on this show, and it was, past due time to bring on Lucas Hann. Don't call him Hann, here on Clippers Talk. I think from Seattle. Lucas, how we doing?
Portland.
Oh, sorry. I'm not supposed to say that. Either way, Portland's also starved for basketball in some ways, you could say right now.
Starved for good basketball, for sure.
Yeah. Right. Okay, let's get into this. Thanks for doing this, my friend. And I'm sorry for taking too long. The YouTubes have only been going on for like 3 weeks. Okay, don't get too mad.
No, I get it. You've been pumping out these episodes. It's been a great series. I think it's really cool for Clippers fans to be able to kind of see all the different folks creating content, covering the team from different angles, one after the other on the channel. And I guess you just kind of are reaching the point now where you got to scrape the bottom of the barrel, and it's good to be here.
How dare you? How dare you? That's where like the best buttery popcorn is, the bottom of the bucket. Like, come on, man. I'm saving the best for last, as I told you off the air. All right, let's start with Ivica Zubac. So I did a show on this on Friday. We had a Clips and Dip with Chuck and Will. We did a live at 5 also, as we are part of the 213 Hoops Empire. The Live the Jam, the podcast, is where you can find Lucas Hann on consistently. But Ivica Zubac gets the contract extension. I'm guessing you think it's fair value and maybe still a steal in some ways, considering he's just entering his prime and has a chance to outperform the contract?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure that I would go steal. I think it's solid value. I think it's a good price. I think that with Paul George's departure, with what we saw from Zoo linking up with Harden in the playoffs, I think a lot of us have been saying for years now, Zoo's ready for a little more responsibility, a little more consistent touches. The conversion rate when he gets the ball in the post is very good. He just doesn't get a lot of those reps. So, yeah, I think he's primed to keep growing into this contract, and it is a pretty significant raise for him. But the big thing that I think folks have to remember is the way that the NBA salary cap is going to keep increasing with the new media rights deal that the league has. It's projected that in the last year of this extension Zoo just signed, the salary cap will be $187 million. So we'll wait and see how the math shakes out with where they put the money and where the raises are across the years of this extension. But if he's making $22 million in a season where the salary cap is $187 million, and he's as good as he is now as your starting center, that gives you a lot of flexibility to work with to build out the rest of the roster and spend money where you need to spend it.
What do you think his strengths have been so far as a player in this league? He's still relatively young. He'll be 27, I think, throughout almost this entire season. And where do you think he needs to improve in? What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of Ivica Zubac's game? And what is that value they're already getting a great return on immediately just because this is who he is as a player already?
Yeah, just strengths-wise, he's effective as a complementary player on the court. So when the team is playing well, Zoo tends to really thrive within his role in that, defensively protecting the rim. I know he's a little slow-footed, so it leads to some, just from if you're casually watching a game, you might go, oh man, he's kind of moving a little slowly out there, right? But his positioning is good. He's a deterrent at the rim, and ultimately has been the key player for the Clippers defensively for a few years now. And offensively, he's efficient when he gets the basketball. He doesn't produce in high volume, but he's efficient when he gets basketball. I think the real area for growth that you would look for in Zoo, especially with Paul George leaving, with James Harden and Kawhi Leonard both aging a little bit, Zoo is the number 3 guy on this team. And that means a little bit more leadership. And there are a couple areas where I think that leadership comes in. One is, infamously, the body language with Zoo when things aren't going well. He tends to really, he gets down on himself. He looks frustrated. He flails his arms. He has a lazy play the next play. And the bad Zoo games can turn really bad because of that. And I think this is really closely connected to the other piece of this, which is, like I said, a complementary player. So he's had to play so many games as the Clippers Iron Man without stars in recent years. And he's talked in media availabilities about the frustration that comes with being out there every night and not knowing if Kawhi is going to be out there with him. And I think that now is the time, and we saw this a little bit in this past playoffs, where he can say, okay, actually, the team just gave me a $20 million a year contract extension. When the other guys are out, I am the guy. And it's not for me to go, who's going to do this? Actually, Zoo is going to need to take a little bit more of that on. So I think that responsibility, leadership, body language, even stamina, staying on the court, telling himself, you're not a part-time starter for a team that wants to go small anymore. You're the guy. So you're going to have to play 32 plus minutes every single game. You have to be in good enough shape to do that. Those are the challenges, I think, in the next couple of years for Zoo.
Yeah, to much is given, much is expected. I think that's a great point. I didn't bring that up on Friday, but when he does suffer with his play, it's usually connected to frustration with the referees, or there's the infamous play last season of Kawhi telling him he was out of position. And he does get into his head a little bit. He's had a bad attitude at times. Younger players tend to have that, but maybe overcoming that is just about being more involved consistently and being featured more now. We seem to all believe, people in this podcast network with the Clippers, how important Ivica Zubac is and how coming into this season, he is their 3rd most important player. I think that should be common knowledge at this point. Is he going to be treated as such from his teammates and from the coaching staff? Because we're saying that, and yet he only got 26 minutes per game last season, which was actually less than the amount of minutes he had the year before.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I do think that the Clippers relatively this season have really weak interior depth compared to what we've seen in recent years. Mo Bamba coming off the bench was a guy who, struggled to play regularly on a team that Joel Embiid spent half the season injured on, right? And then Kawhi at fat power forward, we know is going to miss time. Nico is the other power forward. We know they're going to try to manage his minutes. So I don't know how much small ball we'll see with Nico at center. Beyond that, you go, Kobe Brown, Kai Jones, which are real kind of speculative. You would hope for at least one of those guys to have a breakout year as a depth piece, but you can't count on it. So I think they're going to need Zoo for a heavy minutes load this year. I think that I'm not sure that it's going to look very good when Zoo isn't on the court. And that probably means, he can't play 40 minutes a night. No one does in the NBA at this point. But yeah, he's probably going to need to play 32 to 36 for them to be competitive a lot of nights.
So you're thinking average minutes above 30 this season, somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah, 32. I would say 30 to 32. I think it has to be.
I like it. And that mitigates some of the issues with the backup big position. And he did play 32 minutes per game in that series against the Dallas Mavericks and really proved himself after what I thought was a down series the year before against the Phoenix Suns, where he could have really showed out and thrived a little bit more and didn't. In fact, I think in that game 5, it was Mason Plumlee who made the big impact actually in the second half when they mounted that comeback. But Ivica Zubac has been one of my favorite players because I feel like he has been a little bit overlooked and people haven't understood the importance of him. And you bring up how it's not going to look pretty when he's not on the court. It hasn't for the most part. They were about 3 points better per 100 possessions defensively last season, the Clippers, when he was on the court versus the off numbers. He has done an admirable job of being that last line of defense. And I feel like he's one of the more overlooked players in the league. Do you think he's going to get his just dues now? There's going to be a little bit more attention around him, because I think this is that year where he could easily be on an all defensive team finally.
I'm not sure. I don't know. Just because center is such an important position defensively across the league. There's so many good defensive centers, and I think Zoo for being in the role player tier is, very, very good. He's at the top of the role player tier of centers, but there's that all-star tier of centers that you're competing with when you talk about those end of season awards. Rudy Gobert, Bam Adebayo, Joel Embiid, Anthony Davis, right? I'm just not sure that you see. I don't think we'll reach a point where you start seeing some of those guys get left off of lists in Zoo's favor.
Can we go over a little bit? Because I have said that Ivica Zubac is already a top 10 center. He might be 9th or 10th. But I think if you go through the list, he is a top 10 center currently, because there just aren't that many guys that are looked at as focal points of an offense that are centers in the league anymore. There are a handful of them. And I have a list here, and this is just going off of Hollinger's player efficiency rating, just to see where he lands there. Last season, he wasn't top 10 there. He was 18th. Now, it's dependent upon a lot of things, but I'm just looking at your opinion and where we both might land on this. If I throw out a name, you tell me if this guy's better than Big Zoo, and we can see if we can find 10 guys that are ahead of him at the center position, consistently at the center position. As we know, nowadays, guys will move up a lot. Yeah. Joel Embiid, obviously ahead of him. Jokic ahead of him. Kristaps Porzingis.
Yeah.
Victor Wembanyama.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think probably first half of the season, no. Second half of the season, yes. But you think about the going forward, it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah. Andre Drummond, Carl Tart's guy, is 3-point shooter marksman. Andre Drummond, no. So we got 4 guys ahead of Big Zoo so far. Mark Williams from Charlotte.
No.
Who had the 6th best PER.
Yeah, well, formula stats, man.
Yeah.
Why watch games when you can have a spreadsheet?
More of that coming up in a little bit. Şengün plays some center. He's on the list.
Yeah, he's a better player than Zoo.
So we're going with 5 there. Here's an interesting one, because this guy just got paid, and he got paid more. He got a bigger extension than Ivica Zubac. Jarrett Allen, Fear the Fro from the Cleveland Cavaliers.
I think these guys, these two are probably a lot closer than folks think. But if you took money out of the equation and you just told me one of them is going to play for my team tonight, I would take Jarrett Allen.
Okay, so that's 6 guys ahead of Zoo. The only case I would make for Zoo in this situation is how bad Jarrett Allen was against the New York Knicks in a physical series in the first round a couple of years ago, where he said the lights were too bright, and that quote has haunted him since. But he was better this past year. I do like Jarrett Allen, and I think it's close.
I think it's probably a lot closer than maybe your average fan of other teams would think, right? And I think that also, think about when Zoo first got into the playoffs, right? The lights were too bright for Zoo too. He might not have just said it, but they were. And so I think allowing
he was younger though.
Out, yeah, and I think the Clippers have done a pretty good job of, look, you need to space the floor around a guy like Zoo, and the Evan Mobley is such a talented young player that the Cavaliers are just kind of trying to make it work, but him not quite developing into a shooter and Allen being a strictly around the rim guy has led to some congestion for them, which is created. I think that Zoo would have issues. This is why I've said, at times when it's been talked about the Clippers acquiring certain guys to help out at power forward, can they play with Zoo? Is it going to be effective offensively? Just off the top of my head, a guy like a role player that's been talked about, a guy like Jared Vanderbilt. I don't think Vando could really play the 4 next to Zoo because I think it would be too easy to defend. So, I would lean Allen. I feel pretty comfortable with that.
So 6 guys then ahead of Zoo currently. You putting Evan Mobley in that mix? He can play some center, obviously.
Yeah, but he primarily plays 4. So
we're gonna call him 4.
I'd leave him out. Yeah.
Okay. Daniel Gafford.
Zoo.
Yeah. So still just 6 guys. Clint Capella.
Zoo crushed him in the playoffs.
Yes.
Yeah.
That should be abundantly clear to everybody. Zoo's ahead of him after what we just saw. Clint Capella.
I'm going to take Zoo over Capella.
I think
Capella's in 2024, it's name value more than production.
Mo Wagner. He plays sub center. I don't.
Come on, man.
Yeah. Daron Sharp.
I'm going to take Zoo.
Yeah. Bam Adebayo.
Bam.
There's 7. Okay, 7 guys ahead of Zoo right now. A Clipper killer. His career high happened against the Clippers. His team typically always beats the Clippers. He is no longer with that team.
I'm going to take Zoo over Val.
Jonas Valanciunas? Yeah.
I'll take
his
Zoo.
Defense isn't there.
No,
he's just stretched big, and people are going to point to that. Some people would say, though, that he's a better center. A lot of people would say that. And I don't think they realize defensively it's a no contest in favor of Ivica Zubac.
Well, and I think if you only watched his games against the Clippers in recent seasons, you would go, man, this guy is like, Larry Bird, or like he's like the shooting big. But like last season, he shot 1.5 threes a game at 31%, which is not, he was less of a stretch big last year than Daniel Tice.
That's saying something. Who we got here? Miles Turner.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one.
We're at 7 so far.
I think Miles and Zoo are great foils for each other because their approach to the position is so different. I'm inclined to say that before Miles Turner got Tyrese Halliburton, Zoo was the more productive player. Miles Turner playing with Tyrese Halliburton was more productive last season than Zoo was. What does that mean if you're trying to put these guys in different contexts? If the Pacers called today and said, we want to trade you, Turner, for Zoo, I would say no. But if the Clippers called, the Pacers would say no also. This is maybe the toughest one on the list.
It's a fit thing. Yeah. That's interesting. So how about we say even? Does it clear?
I would say
Zoo?
even. Yeah. I would
so
say
it's still
even.
Just 7 guys ahead of him. They may fall in the exact same spot, and that is a tough one. This one may not be so tough. Rudy Gobert.
It's Rudy. For all his flaws. Again, going back to what we were saying about with Allen, right? If you're talking about production for the contract, but if you're just saying we're picking a team, we're playing tonight, it's hard to argue with Rudy.
DeAndre Ayton.
What's the weather like? If it's
you talked about Ivica Zubac being moody and having bad body language earlier. Now we come to DeAndre Ayton.
If it's an icy day, I'm taking Zoo, but
I'll take Zoo. I just know what I'm getting more.
I think you know what you're getting more. Again, I'm here in this kind of context situation where it's like, if I have a good team and I need to win a game tonight, I'm taking Zoo. But if I had an expansion team starting today, I would probably take Ayton.
Higher upside, better for a situation like Portland.
Yeah, and I think it was, it was just a year ago when the Suns traded Ayton to Portland that Rob and I were both kind of in agreement that, if you could put together that Eric Gordon contract that the Clippers ended up releasing and Zoo in some package to get the talent upgrade and get younger with Ayton, that even for the pitfalls, you kind of have to do it. The year in Portland really didn't go well for DeAndre. I mean, I saw it up close, a handful of times.
Yes.
The motor's not there, but how much of that is I would say at this point, I think I would lean Zoo, but I'm still not all the way out on Ayton, even though I know a lot of people are.
I agree with that. So we stick with 8 guys currently ahead of Big Zoo on the list. Here's a good one. He just got paid. Isaiah Hartenstein. Isaiah Hartenstein, former Clipper. I predicted he'd go to OKC. It is going to be a problem. They're going to win 60 games.
Yeah,
I think
they're so
going to be the number 1 seed again.
I think based on last season heading into next season, Hartenstein is the more productive of the 2 players. Zoo has a more consistent track record of health and lower downside in terms of things with Hartenstein that you worry about, like the foul rate that can keep him out of games, right? So again, if we were projecting forward like for 3 years, I think Hartenstein is a much bigger question mark. Zoo is a much more stable guy. But if we're saying, the top 10 centers in the NBA last season, Hartenstein would edge Zoo out on the list, I think.
And basically we're saying, who would you rather have today? There's a case to be made for Hartenstein, clearly.
Yeah.
But it's not in a landslide. It's really close. We could call it even again. Or you could say Hartenstein above him, and that would make 9.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm gonna say still a slight edge to Zoo.
Okay. It remains 8 guys in front of him.
Can I defend
Zubac
that?
has a larger body of work.
Yeah, and I'll say for how good he was in New York last year, right? Starting a lot, playing 25 minutes a game. Obviously, he has some versatility as a passer that eludes Zoo still. But, the average last year for Hartenstein was 8 and 8. He had big moments. He played well in the playoffs. He stepped into a role with Mitchell Robinson injured and produced well late in the season. But we still are, we just haven't seen is this guy going to average a double-double over a full season as a team's go-to guy? Is he going to stay healthy? Is he going to play minutes? Is he going to avoid fouls? I think there's enough question marks there that I still would lean Zoo, but it wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't be surprised to see both guys play, 75 games this year in their respective roles and Hartenstein be more productive.
And I think Ivica Zubac is the type of player with the bag that he has on the block that would have an easier time getting to 15-point-a-game average than Isaiah Hartenstein, who has a really good floater. But then a lot of it's dependent on him getting the basketball in the right spots and being more of a rim runner, where Ivica Zubac could ISO a little bit more and give you more down in the painted area. Their offensive game, Zoo's just a little more refined, but it's close.
Well, Zoo's definitely more refined as a throw it into him in the post option. I think Hartenstein is more refined as a roll man because of that floater, but also his passing ability is clear of Zoo's. So it's kind of system dependent. But yeah, it's a tight one. But I would actually lean Zoo still. I think Hartenstein, for all the hype, was an 8 and 8 guy last year, not a 15 and 12 guy.
So we're at 8 guys, right? 8 guys in front of Zoo, clearly in front of Zoo. Jakob Poeltl, Zoo.
Nah.
Karl Anthony Towns plays.
Are we calling him a 5?
I don't want to because Rudy Gobert's there.
He hasn't been playing center for 2 years.
Yeah. Nick Claxton.
I'm going to Zoo right now for sure. Claxton, I think, is really interesting, but Zoo.
Jalen Duren.
Again, if we were building a team for, an expansion team and we were trying to set up for a longer window, Duren is a really promising young guy. Zoo right now is the guy who has been starting on playoff teams, I think you feel just a little more comfortable with. especially that high floor defensively in terms of what he can provide. But this is a tough one. I mean, again, I'll say what I've said a few times, which is if I need to win a game tonight, or if I'm saying, who's going to be the better center in this upcoming season, I'll take Zoo. But if I was drafting an expansion team, I would take Duren hands down.
Yeah, it's not clear cut. It needs to be clearly this guy is better, or else Ty goes to Big Zoo, I guess, in this situation. Here's some good ones. Derek Lively.
Zoo. I like Lively a lot, but Zoo.
Big upside. Walker Kessler.
Yeah, Kessler, I feel like the hype kind of cooled a little bit after kind of bursting onto the scene, replacement Rudy Gobert, putting up, kind of similar block numbers and on-off defense numbers. I would go Zoo over Kessler, although I think Kessler's another guy I think is intriguing going forward.
Nikola Vucevic.
No, that guy stinks.
Yusuf Nurkic. It's Zoo.
No.
Nick Richards.
No.
It's Zoo. Mitchell Robinson. There was a time.
Are we taking health? Or what are we saying about health?
Let's say they're healthy, because I don't think he's had. I know he hasn't been the Iron Man Zoo is, but outside of this past season, he's been healthy for the most part. Mitchell Robinson.
I think that these are guys who are probably in the same, a really similar tier. But I would lean Zoo for durability and I think just a little higher floor defensively in terms of what he does for a team.
And I spoke too soon. Mitchell Robinson only played 59 games last season. A couple of years before that, it was just 31. So the durability point is it's a good one here. In this case,
if the Knicks called the Clippers and offered that, I would say no.
Yeah,
I think if the Clippers called, I think the Knicks would take it.
What if the Milwaukee Bucks called and offered Brook Lopez?
I would say no because age. You just can't quite get past that especially with the extension that they just got Zoo on the price that they just got him on. You have, and whatever if he's top 10 or not, right? But you have a good above average starting center locked in at a reasonable price for the next 4 seasons. Brook Lopez isn't going to be in the NBA for 4 more seasons.
Yeah, he's 36. Al Horford, no.
Love
old.
Al Horford, but yeah.
Mo Bamba. Oh, he's on the Clippers. Mason Plumlee is in Phoenix, and we saw that. Wendell Carter Jr.?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
I haven't thought about him in a while.
Yeah. Let me think about. I think Wendell is one of those guys that at a certain point looked like he could be on a trajectory towards being, pretty clearly higher on this list, and I think has settled in more so into that role player tier. What he does bring you is just a little more versatility. The shooting is real there, 3 attempts a game, 37% from deep, but the rebounding and interior defense are not quite at the level that Zoo is. There's not quite the same track record there of, first of all, durability, which we just talked about. I mean, he's never played more than 62 games in a season in 6 years.
Yeah.
And Zoo's track record is just being a durable starter on a playoff team. I think I would still go Zoo, but Wendell is a nice player. I think they're in the same tier. Zoo is just ranked higher in that tier for me.
Yeah, he's one of those guys in the mix next to Zoo, but he's not obviously clearing him. 11-7 last season. He played about 26 minutes per game, just like Zoo. But as you mentioned, it looked like a couple of years ago when he was getting 15 and 11, he was on the fast track to passing Zoo by. That did not happen. Wiseman, no.
No.
Dwight Powell, no. Daniel Tice, no. Jackson Hayes, no. Tristan Thompson, no. Isaiah Stewart, hardcore, but no.
Is Anthony Davis a center for you?
Yeah, I'll put him in there
Because he might, I know he might show up as a power forward on some lists, but I kind of think of him as a center now.
They honestly didn't put him on this list, but when they're at their best, he's playing center. So
yeah, he's best at center. They're best with him at center, and I think that in the last couple of years they've leaned into that a lot more. I mean, just looking at Basketball Reference, 100% of his minutes 2 seasons ago, 97% of his minutes last season at center. So yeah, I would put him there, and he obviously would be clear of Zoo as well.
So Zoo is 10th with a few guys next to him that you could lean towards. Different strokes for different folks, different situations. You might want them over Ivica Zubac, but he clearly is right there for having an argument for being a top 10 center in the NBA.
Yeah, I think
I don't want to hear it, guys.
If you based on that list that we just did, if you were to say, I think you could reasonably put Zoo 10, 11, 12, maybe 13. There are a few guys there that I think, like a guy like Miles Turner. I know a lot of folks, see shooting and just can't look at anything else that does or doesn't happen on the court. But yeah, I mean, I think if you told me before we started, you're like, yeah, Zoo's probably like between 10th and 15th. That feels like a comfortable range to me. He's solid. He's an above average starter, but he's not in that elite tier. He's not going to compete for all-star appearances. And at under $20 million a year average annual value with the way that the salary cap is going, I wouldn't call it a steal, but I would say it's a solid value.
You may want Miles Turner over him. You may want Isaiah Hartenstein. You may want Walker Kessler, Wendell Carter, these guys.
Jalen Duren,
But Zoo's right there. He's right there. And for this Clippers team, I think you made some good points. For this team, where they're at, and I am intrigued when we talk about Ivica Zubac getting the ball and going to work. I think what he showed in that series against the Dallas Mavericks was illuminating for some people. I've been saying for years, you can tell me if I'm crazy, Lucas, but he has far more skill level than anybody realizes. He is a long-lost Gasol brother at times. Like what he was doing with the left hand in game 1 of that series against Dallas, where he was their best player in game 1, like, I don't think people understand. Zoo really is a bucket if you give him the opportunity.
And if he can handle that workload with more consistency. I think, right, like we have to acknowledge that a lot of times guys, every NBA player, I mean, how many guys have we seen have 30-point games and not be in the league the next year, right? Every NBA player has a skill level to get to that point. But can you get to that skill level consistently when an opposition knows that you're the guy they need to prepare for, right? So for Zoo to have a big 2020 game is great. I'm not saying that we should expect him to be consistently at 2020, but if he's going to have those types of games, like however many games last year, I would have to look through and be like, how many games were like Zoo games, right? Maybe 5. Well, if we want him to have 20 games that are Zoo games, that's going to mean more minutes, more workload, and he's going to show up more on scouting reports, which means teams are there's less likely that he's going to catch a team sleeping with funnel, let them throw the ball in the post, right? I think a lot of teams right now say, yeah, if they're going to throw it into Zoo, let them throw it into Zoo. That means we don't have to worry about James. We don't have to worry about Kawhi. And even though he's efficient in those moments, everyone gets to stand and breathe for 15 seconds. They're only going to do it 3 times a game anyway, right? So we're not going to lose on it. To be more like, no, we're actually going to keep feeding him. He's going to manage that workload, maintain his efficiency, force defenses to adjust to him. That is a really big next step.
So we went through the list. We said there's definitively 9 guys ahead of Zoo and a handful of guys in the mix with him. To close out the Zoo talk here, Lucas, how many points is he going to average this season? How many boards is he going to get? Or where does he need to be, you think? And what's realistic for this Clippers team to be successful and to have a chance to stay out of the play-in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, to stay out of the play-in is going to be tough, and I'm not sure, right? Staying out of the play-in has a lot more to do with how many games Kawhi Leonard plays than whether Zoo is at 14 points a game or 16 points a game, But
say if I give you 60 Kawhi games, 65 plus from James Harden, then what does Zoo need to contribute enough to keep him out?
Yeah, well, the first thing is the minutes, right? Which we already talked about, because it's one thing to say, what's he going to average per game, but they need his presence on the court for 32 plus minutes a game. And that will lead to higher per game averages, right? Because he's playing more minutes, so he has more opportunities to do things. Last season, he averaged 16 points and 12 and a half rebounds per 36 minutes. So if he can play 32 minutes a game and average 16 points and 12 rebounds, that would be a phenomenal season for Ivica Zubac. If he can average 16 points and 12 rebounds in 32 minutes, I think that's a high-end outcome. I think you would look back on that at the end of the year and say, we could not possibly have asked him for anything more.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to put it. And I'm predicting about 16 and 11, 17 and 10, somewhere in there. I think it's within the realm of possibility.
15 and 12 would be kind of my benchmark, it's the minutes, right? Because if he only plays 28 minutes a game, he's not going to average 15 and 12. And then you're starting to look at, well, can he average 14 and 10, right? But if he plays 32 minutes a game, 15 and 11, right? That's right around where I would be looking.
And I have faith if you give him the minutes, he'll give you the production. It's yet to be proven because he's never gotten the consistent minutes. And therefore, when we talk about Big Zoo being inconsistent at times, and we talk about the up and down plays, some of it's built in just because he doesn't know his role that night. I'm interested to see what conversations they're going to have behind the scenes coming into this season of what the expectations are from the coaching staff for Ivica Zubac. But we can move on from that, and this kind of ties in a little bit. We talked about it a little bit off the air, but I was having a conversation with somebody last night. You mentioned Ivica Zubac and just his production going up because he gets the minutes, because a few people said, yikes, almost $20 million a year with this extension for a guy that is average 9 and 7 when you look at his career numbers. And it's like, dude, that's off of 21 minutes per game. That's not indicative of who he is today or who he can be if you give him more minutes. It's pretty meaningless, actually. But that is a basic traditional stat that people are looking at and evaluating a player off of. And then last night I have a conversation with a guy, something totally non-Clippers related. And this made me think of you because I think you're very articulate about these things and you have a great basketball mind. But we were talking about GOAT conversations, of course, it was on X. And somebody brought up Kobe Bryant. And it was a conversation with Gilbert Arenas, who says a lot of wild stuff for attention. But I think in this particular subject matter, he actually made a good point that I agree with. And I've been saying for a while. Kobe mimicked second three-peat MJ. Those moves, his post moves, that's the MJ that Kobe was studying, and that's the guy who he looked like throughout most of his career, as opposed to 80s Jordan through the first three-peat, which was a much more athletic player, springy. He had explosiveness at times that Russell Westbrook has had in this league. Okay, put that aside, but then the guy said, well, Kobe Bryant shot 5% less with his overall career field goal percentage than Michael Jordan. So he was saying this is a Jordan disciple. He's not even close to him. And I brought up the point that, well, field goal percentage is almost an antiquated way to look at the overall numbers and productivity because it has 3-point percentage built in, and Kobe took far more threes than MJ did and actually shot about 4 or 5% better from beyond the arc, even though he wasn't great at it, just 32%. The volume was there, and the volume is very meaningful. And if you look at points per shot attempt or points per possession, they're closer. True shooting percentage, effective field goal percentage, they're much closer than you might realize when it comes to how good they were as scorers efficiency-wise. How do you help people understand arguments like this? Because I could really never get through to the guy. He could never understand why teams take more threes, and he's talking about the only team that has been successful and won championships with a bunch of threes would be Steph Curry with the Golden State Warriors. And I was like, hello, the Boston Celtics just won, taking the most threes in the league, and every team that does win now is taking far more threes than they ever did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago. It's incredible because of the math.
It's not even just every team that wins, it's every team, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone is taking more threes than they took 10 years ago. And, you know, I mean,
I guess
you're asking how you explain it to someone who you know doesn't understand the math is challenging, but it's just I really think that for me, when I really started souring on the mid-range game, and I'm not sour on the mid-range game. I mean, I was I was a pick and roll point guard, and the mid-range pull-up is part of what you have to do to make those reads over the course of a game. But you take it out of the context of, is this a good shot, right? It's not about this shot, this shooter on this possession in a rhythm, open the way that it's not about this shot. It's about 100 shots. And how many of those 100 shots do you need to make for it to be good for the game, right? For your offense to produce enough over the course of the game. And it breaks down to, point per possession. And if you are shooting, a great mid-range shooter might make 45% of their 18-foot pull-ups. That's a great mid-range shooter.
Yeah.
Like
Kawhi's at 47% for his career from 10 to 16 feet out, for example.
Yeah.
Jordan was great in the mid-range.
A lot of guys who are considered like good mid-range shooters, like, a guy like Jamal Crawford in his prime, was shooting, 38, 40, 42, depending on the year.
Melo was at 41% for his career, and everybody thinks he's some mid-range god because it looks pretty when they go in.
Well, and volume, right? Because ultimately, mid-range shots are going to be, they're the ones that you get stuck in late in possession, high difficulty looks. And so, being able to kind of pull a rabbit out of a hat or to do it in isolation against the post when the defense is locked in, right? There's a lot of value to guys who can do it. We see the best players in the NBA still are really proficient at it. But if a guy's shooting 45%, which is elite, over 100 shots, that means you're generating 0.9 points per possession on those 100 shots. If a guy is shooting 35% from three, which is, for a long time was kind of considered the marker of average, and now, because of the way that the three-point game has moved on, is actually kind of below average for a perimeter player in the NBA, right? 35%, you go, he's not really a shooter. That guy is producing 1.05 points per possession. So if we play a 100 possession game back and forth, which most NBA games are a little less than that, right? But I'm going to beat you 105 to 90. And it's going to take a lot of variance. Bad shooting night for me, good shooting night for you. You could win, but 15 points is a big gap to close. So it's just about adjusting that diet. Like I said, you still need to take those mid-range shots to keep the defense honest. You're still going to be forced into some late in possessions, right? Or when the defense takes away your primary choice or whatever, you're still going to need them. That skill set is still important. But you want to look for other things. And what happens when you prioritize trying to create those more efficient shots, and the league learns and adjusts to that, you're actually going to get higher quality mid-range looks than you were before, because the 3-point shot is being overplayed, and that's where you start to have a chance to then get even more efficient and shoot in those high 40s or even into the 50s sometimes from mid-range. Whereas when you're a guy who's going to go, dribble, crossover, pick and roll, pull up, contested 18-footer, that's going to just be 38% the whole time.
That's a really smart, easily digestible way to put it. I've always said, for instance, going back to the argument with Kobe taking more threes than MJ and how that factors into field goal percentage and why he shot 5% less. I told the guy, look at it this way. If you're shooting 33% from three, that would be considered bad. And that's where about Kobe was at throughout his career. But that's also the equivalent, 33.3% from three, of shooting 50% from two. So even when you're shooting almost 3% less than league average from three, it still isn't that bad of a shot over, so many taken with the volume. Because the Boston Celtics, that's exactly what they shot in the NBA Finals, 33% from three. They weren't even shooting a great percentage, and they still ended that series in 5 because they took 60 more threes than the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, and I would say, you can just look at 2-point percentage too, right? Like Jordan was 51% on twos in his career. And again, when I say, 45% is good, I'm talking about mid-range specifically, not all twos, because obviously layups and dunks are going to be higher. Kobe was 48% on twos in his career. So that's still that 3% gap on that diet of shots over 20,000 shots over a decade career for both guys. That 3% gap is significant.
Oh yeah. But I wasn't trying to say Kobe was as good as MJ. Like, I'm just saying it's closer than you realize when it comes to efficiency.
But that's one of the things you see a lot of guards in the NBA now. Sometimes you go and you look at a guard who is shooting, 41% from the field, and your initial reaction like, oh God, 41% from this guy's so inefficient. And then you realize, well, actually he's shooting 38% from three and 48% from two, which is totally good. He just takes 5 times as many threes as he does twos.
Yeah. So 7 of his 10 shots per game are threes.
Yeah. The best guy to talk to about this would be Shane Young, who is just obsessed with not using field goal percentage in anything anymore. He's like leading the crusade.
I've agreed with him. I don't know if I agree with him about all the CP3 stuff he says or the Phoenix Suns. I do agree with the Phoenix Suns turning into the San Antonio Spurs. That didn't happen, but hey, we've had taken our lumps with the Clippers. It's antiquated. Now in the playoffs, things slow down, and Kawhi has talked about this, but they use examples of the best guys ever in the mid-range. It's like, well, that's not who 99.9% of the league is. So that's not a real good reason for taking more of those shots. If you're really elite at it, yes, you should take them. Because in the playoffs, often they're giving up those shots. And Kawhi has mentioned that before, that they're giving him the mid-range, and he studied MJ. And MJ was a mid-range god. And Kobe, I think part of the reason his 2-point percentage is 3% less than MJ's is. My other point was Kobe actually had more moves than MJ because he took all of MJ's and then built his own too. They weren't necessarily as efficient, and he took way more bad shots out there, and he's probably the best bad shot taker. It's either him or Kyrie, because once in a while they would go in and it would look amazing, but he also took so many unnecessary shots. So that's how you get the field goal percentage also going down. But it's an interesting conversation of just trying to convert people and make them understand the modern game a little bit more. And how do you do so without sounding like a D-bag and a stat nerd? And then they'll just go back to, wins and losses, and that's all that matters, or 6 rings and things like this. It's a tough environment on Twitter sometimes, Lucas, all the time.
Yeah, my advice would be spend less time on Twitter.
Oh, that's a salient point too. that simplifies it, distills it down to something really simple. Should Paul George stay off of Twitter? I heard that he's off of social media on Instagram. I wasn't sure if that was true or not. I know Podcast P has a heavy presence on Twitter with his guys there too, the social media guru.
The guru, yeah.
The guru with thousands.
Anytime you have a guru,
I wanted to ask you about Paul George because You've been on record. I think the last time you came on Clips and Dip, you called him, what was the word?
Loser, I think.
A loser. Yeah, loser. Yeah. I wanted you to expand and expound on that and why you would say such inflammatory language about Paul George and what you mean by that, and give you the opportunity to explain, because it's not like you're the only guy who has said that over the years.
Sure. Yeah, but I'll just I'll start by saying, the people are on my side, Adam. So I don't need to defend myself.
I'm not on either side. I'm learning.
Here's what I would say. There's loser in the literal sense of like hasn't won a championship, right? And I think that tends to be a really cheap way to talk about basketball and about the NBA, because like, is Jamal Murray a winner? Yeah, right. I mean, it's hard to say he isn't. Sure got lucky with that situation with Jokic in Denver, though, right? Yeah. I think there's lots of other guys who aren't any more or less. They're not necessarily. Jamal's not necessarily a better player than them. I'm not saying Jamal's a bad player, or that he's not a high character guy. I'm saying there's lots of other really good players with really high character who didn't end up drafted to Denver with Jokic. Right?
It's often circumstantial.
Yeah. And so, just to say, oh, he hasn't won a title. I mean, Paul George has done a lot of winning in his career, just not in the NBA Finals. What I mean by that is he does not take responsibility either in the moment or after the fact. He's not honest about himself. He's not honest with himself. He's not honest about himself. He blames others. And then when he's in the moment and you need someone to be the guy, he doesn't want it. And that to me is the indictment. The going into this past series without Kawhi Leonard and saying, yeah, James, you go guard Kyrie, I'm going to guard Derek Jones Jr. That is what I'm talking about, right? Or going into these games where he takes 7 field goal attempts, or where he puts up these mid-range shots and then never gets to the rim. Never. It seems like he's always waiting for someone else, right, to do it. And you look around these other stars in the NBA, they take matters into their own hands. And maybe it's not pretty. Maybe they have a bad game. Maybe they turn the ball over. Maybe they lose because the other team was better. But they really go out there and play for it. And it feels like Paul is content to say, yeah, Terrence, let's see what you got. It's like, no, man, you have to be the guy. And there were moments in Paul George's Clipper tenure where he was the guy, where he really stepped into it. That 2021 Western Conference Finals run, right? He was not, the first. I don't love saying Paul George carried the Clippers to the Western Conference Finals, because we all watched that first round series. Kawhi Leonard was superhuman in the late games against Dallas to get them out of that hole and into the second round against Utah. But honestly, even though the Clippers lost that Western Conference Finals series to the Suns, and I don't know what his field goal percentage was or whatever, but Paul George was a leader in those games. He took responsibility. He shouldered the workload. He made things happen. He knew that if it wasn't him, it wasn't going to happen. And he went out there and did everything he could to make sure it was him. And in the 3 years since then, he just hasn't had that approach. And every year it's a complaint about, well, we didn't have this point guard, or we didn't have that coach, or we were running too many of these plays. And it's not, man, I just stop talking, go get the basketball, and show everyone how good you are. I think Paul George is a tremendous basketball player, but I don't think the mentality has been there since that Western Conference Finals run that is necessary for him to be a star player on a winning team. Maybe a change of scenery, new coach, new co-stars, new city. Maybe that will reawaken that a little bit in him, but it wasn't happening here. And I was just left by the end of this season just so disappointed by the way that he approached his responsibility as a star, as a professional, as a leader. I found all of it to be lacking.
I used the 2021 run as a shield for a while from criticism on Paul George, but there was nothing I could defend after this last playoff series against Dallas. It was woefully inadequate for the requirements of being a star. His performance or lack thereof. It was tough, and the quotes were tough too, and the B team stuff. It's just unnecessary. I don't get it. Mentioned Big Zoo getting his contract quickly here. Terrence Mann next, and what do you think that number could be?
Yeah, really interesting one with Terrence. You know, I think if you were to say who's like the third most important player for the Clippers next year, obviously you got Kawhi and James, right? I think that some folks might try to say Terrence before Zoo. And I think Zoo's consistency is a floor raiser defensively. I think Terrence, because he's a wing, he's more versatile. He can do more with the ball in his hands. There's always felt like a little bit more breakout potential there, right? But Zoo has clearly been, become the better player of the two of them. Although Terrence is still a good player and an important piece of this team. At the same time, the market tends to be difficult for centers, and versatile wings tend to get a little more love financially. I would think that you would probably, you always want to get a little bit of a better deal, right? So I think this Zoo extension came out at 19.5 million average. I had said, you'd love to have him at 18. 19.5 is solid. You'd always love it. If they'd sign him at 18, I would say, yeah, that's great, man, but you would have loved to get it for 16, right? So I don't know, maybe I think a little less for Terrence. It might be the same number, but it also could easily be a situation where, these guys are in positions with Paul George leaving that they could really be eyeing breakout years. And Terrence might think, he's limited in terms of what he can get on an extension because of what his current salary is. There's math equations in there, right? If he hits free agency, there's no limit. And maybe he thinks that if he has a great year, if Terrence Mann has a breakout year this season as a starting two guard for the Clippers, you look at the money that guys are getting to be solid starters in the NBA right now, right? Like, what was that? If you can remember, what was that KCP contract this summer? It was over 20. It was over
Orlando.
20. Yeah,
it was big time. A shorter deal, but high annual return.
Yeah, and that's a guy who's older than Terrence Mann as well, but also
$66 million over 3 years.
Championship pedigree. Yeah, so I could easily see Terrence being younger than KCP going into next summer, thinking if he has a really good season, he could be a 20 million plus guy. And now I'm not trying to say Terrence is as good as KCP. He's not. He hasn't been in recent years, but he's younger and he could be kind of betting on himself and looking for that breakout season. So yeah, I think if a deal gets done, it will be in a very similar range to what we saw with Zoo, maybe around that 18 low end, 16 high end, 20. But he also could look as a kind of bet on himself guy. And considering the inconsistency with his role for the Clippers over the last few years, and considering that they are very clearly angling to look to add a star free agent in the coming years, and that could result in Terrence, going back to the bench on a reasonable contract. $20 million is not necessarily guaranteed starter money anymore in the NBA. The Clippers have a $20 million guy coming off the bench right now at Norman Powell, and that's before the cap increases another $30 million. So yeah, he could really look at a bet on himself, look for somewhere where the money's a little better, where the role is a little more guaranteed. I'm not totally sure, but there's no deadline for these talks. So all the way until late June, right before free agency opens, they can keep talking. Patience, can be prudent. And I wouldn't necessarily say, I'm expecting to see a Terrence number come in the next week or so. That's not, intel sources, none of that. Just, I'm not holding my breath.
Okay. And, that brought in Derrick Jones Jr. So it's interesting to see the playing time factor to be able to put up a breakout season could be a little bit out of his control, of course. And his minutes have been wonky and all over the place, and his role has been all over the place. So I don't know.
I think it's in his control, but there's competition for wing minutes. He has to win that competition, right?
Put up those threes. Don't start cold.
He's got to get out there, and if they're going to start James, Terrence, Derek, Kawhi, Zoo.
They got to, right?
And if the offense in that unit isn't good enough, it's very likely that Norm for Terrence is the switch. And Derek Jones Jr. is not going to do anything with the ball in his hands on offense. He's going to cut. He's going to be you hope for average three-point shooter standing in the corner. Terrence is going to have to be the number 3, like the secondary pick and roll playmaker. He's going to have to take above the break threes. He's going to have to create with the ball in his hands, as that complementary scoring wing. He can't just be the I stand in the corner and guard the other team's best player guy. That's Derek now. Terrence has to be a little more of a utility all-around creative wing. And if he does that well enough, he'll keep that starting job. And if he doesn't, Ty's going to be forced to adjust. And if Ty is forced to adjust, now you enter a bench climate with Amir Coffey, who we know is no slouch, with Chris Dunn, who's coming in a very similar point of attack defense, ball handler mold. Who knows what the situation is going to be with Kevin Porter Jr. as a wing depth option and what he can do as a scorer, but his efficiency struggles, the potential suspension, the likelihood that he does, something else stupid or illegal that costs him the opportunity to play in the NBA. So there's a lot of variables there, but nothing's guaranteed for Terrence, but the opportunity to earn it will be there.
Couple more for you here, Lucas. I appreciate your time, of course. Hopefully your Labor Day weekend isn't too scheduled out.
Oh, we got the Lob the Jam the Pod right after this, man.
All right. So guys, you mentioned it, and I think people's ears perked up when you said it. The Clippers' long-term plan, you alluded to it, of angling for another star. Because the salary cap, the restrictions, them being under the first apron in this case, you were the first to point that out as soon as they gave that non-taxpayer mid-level exception to Derek Jones Jr. Just how favorable of a position are they in, considering they lost Paul George, how they retooled, and where the salary structure is headed the next couple of years for them?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the Zoo and Terrence extensions become interesting too, because they were in a situation where they gave James Harden a short-term contract. And so they were in a situation where in that 2026 offseason, it was Kawhi and a lot of flexibility. And now they are starting in a way that I think, like I said, the cap is going to be, in the last year of this extension, the cap is going to be like $187 million. Having a starting center for $20 million is totally, that's not going to impede you from doing other things you need to do.
What is it now, in the 140s?
Yeah, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but it's going to raise 10% every year, basically, is the way that it is going to go up with the new media rights deal. To avoid another Kevin Durant Warriors big cap spike, every team has max space situation. They're making it so that it can only increase. It can only increase 10% each year, but with the new media rights deal, it will increase that 10%. So I just checked. It's 140.5 this year, and
the cap and my rent going up 10% every year. Shaking hands.
Yeah, 10% every year. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's they'll be in a situation where that future of, hey, it's 2026, we've got Kawhi Leonard and max space, let's see what we can do. We're still quite a bit a ways from that. 2 full years, 2 full seasons of basketball. How does Kawhi Leonard's age decline happen in those 2 years? How does James Harden's age decline happen in those 2 years?
And it could be 1 year for James.
Yeah, it could be, right? What does Kawhi's health look like? Is coming to play with a team that is paying Kawhi Leonard $50 million going to be attractive to other star players in 2026? Or is it going to be, a twilight for a guy who can't run anymore, right? And are they going to make keeping that room open for 2 years requires making a lot of really tough decisions and not maximizing your current talent? So like extending Zoo works against the 2026 plan, but you can try to balance it. You can try to juggle those two competing priorities, but like Norman Powell, Norman Powell is a talented player who helps this Clippers team, especially in a post-Paul George world. He's going to be at a point where, do you extend him? Do you let him walk? Do you trade him and try to recoup some value? And, keeping him means sacrificing some of that 2026 flexibility. And if you go down the line and you make we're going to try to keep this guy call on everyone, you don't have max space in 2026 anymore.
Right.
But are you willing to let James Harden and Norman Powell and Terrence Mann all walk and try to roll out a Kawhi Leonard, team that doesn't have those guys around him, if it means that the next year you have a chance at getting someone? And then will someone even want to come? So it's still very speculative. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made in the next 24 months that will determine if that possibility stays open or not. But I do think it is sort of the short-term reaction to losing a player like Paul George is, okay, well, where's our next opportunity for a pivot? And that next opportunity for a pivot in terms of adding an all-star type player is 2 years down the road.
And the two guys that could be available in 2026 would be Luka Doncic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Am I going light years brain if I feel like it's actually better for OKC to win a championship because that would give SGA the out to be able to leave them?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, sure, maybe, right? But
or he's a legacy player and they're still set up and they have all these picks.
Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. Last one for you. Your role with the 213 Empire, the Lob, the Jam, the podcast, and how this all came about. And just because I've been talking a lot about the multimedia landscape and how things are changing and blogs versus vlogs and vodcasts. And now I'm doing a YouTube and where everything's going in my business with radio. I'd just be interested to get your thoughts on, where 213 is headed, why it started, how you have to evolve or die, and how you have to adapt in just this new media world.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we could do a whole hour on this. And I've been doing this. I've been in this sphere for a little while now, and have some thoughts on trends and trajectories and histories. But really, we were in a situation, right, folks? I'm sure a lot of folks know the history, but Robert Flom and I were with SB Nation doing the Clippers blog over there for a long time, and there was some legal stuff with how independent contractor arrangements could work in the state of California, blah, blah, blah. And SB Nation made the choice to just kind of cut loose a large portion of their blogs to avoid, paying folks for their work. And Rob and I, we decided we just wanted to keep doing it. So we made 213 Hoops, and really our mission statement or our sort of guiding principle has just been, we want to have content for Clippers fans. And I think both growing up in LA as Clippers fans, even though neither of us live in LA anymore, we went through those ups and downs that folks listening to this, will relate to, or maybe older fans will relate to. It's been sort of a golden decade if you joined the fan base since then. But, are we going to have a beat writer at the LA Times, right? Which we're right back in that boat now where the LA Times has really not, has decided not to cover the Clippers despite having a phenomenal writer there in Andrew.
Had Andrew Greif on.
Yeah. We love Andrew. We've had him on too. So you know, wanting that space where there's going to be coverage, but it's, you know, and there's a place for everyone in this landscape, right? So I'm not trying to say that anyone who does things differently than how we do things is wrong or bad. But what the space that we want is, it's Clipper driven, it's Clippers fans, but it is still more analytical. You don't hear us cheering a lot, right? We're homers in a sense, but
I hear Rob booing a lot, actually.
yeah, sometimes you hear me booing Rob while he's speaking, right? But that's us. That's the way that we, you know, we've been friends for over a decade. That's the way that our friendship is. That's the blend of our personalities and the way that we see the game and the way that we relate to this fandom of this team. And we wanted to just create a space because we felt like, you know, the previous site that we had was really the place where that existed for Clippers fans. And, you know, if folks are like, we don't want to hear stats, we don't want to hear talk about rotation and who should be playing over who, and we want to be fans, and, you know, that's okay, right? It's okay for folks to connect to the game differently, but we wanted to make sure.
Go get him, Chris Wilde. Go get him.
We wanted to make sure that there was a space for, you know, for us to do our thing, and for folks who have that same connection and kind of orientation towards appreciating the team and the game, to do that as well. And I think that, you know, in that sense, that was really what motivated me to, you know, connect you with Chuck and Will, and try to make sure that that was something that could happen, you know, just from an incubator perspective, right? Like, if there's a way that we can help foster and facilitate the expansion of quality spaces for Clippers fans to connect online, to get more content about their team, to fuel that fandom, because that's what has been such a passion for Rob and I, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that fully addresses your question, but that's just sort of like where we came from and what we do and why we do it. And I think that other folks out there are doing things differently than we do it, and that's great. I really think that a broader and more diverse Clippers sphere of digital content is best for fans. And, you know, I'm both a Clippers fan, which means it's great for me to have all this great content and diverse voices out there. And I am someone who's spent a lot of time and labor trying to serve Clippers fans. And so seeing the quality and quantity that is available now, you know, really compared to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you know, I think it's a cool moment to be a Clippers fan. Sometimes someone comes in and says, hey, I'm looking for a Clippers podcast, you know, and it's like, compared to 15 years ago, where can you look for to get your like Clippers fix, right? There's so many options now to find someone who you connect to and enjoy them. So, yeah.
Well, you do great work. I'm proud to be a part of it now with 213 Hoops. Does the name have to change with Paul George and Philly?
Well, you know, the idea with 213 Hoops, and it was actually a longtime friend and reader, Adam Horowitz, who was the first to pitch 213 Hoops to us when we were thinking about names. The thinking was, yes, right now we've got the 213 era with Paul and Kawhi, but the Intuit Dome is in the 213 you know, zip code, area code. And so that was the thinking at the time, was that the name would age well beyond that current pairing of stars. But the way that then 213 really like entered I feel like at that moment in time, I'm trying to think back to, you know, like December 2019, when we were really working on getting ready to launch this. I feel like people weren't really saying 213 yet to talk about like Paul and Kawhi, the 213 era. People, you know, it was so early into it.
Yeah. They had the one photo op where Doc Rivers made sure to put the jerseys next to each other, but outside of that,
I could be totally wrong. I could be totally misremembering. Maybe people were saying that from day one, but I'm just thinking at the time we weren't necessarily immediately drawn to it. And the idea was that staying power with the location of the new arena would but now it's become such a like 213 has really become synonymous with Paul and Kawhi. So I don't know. I'm open-minded about it, I would say, but we haven't. We're not actively in the process of rebranding. There's a lot of, we have like everything is official, right? And so there's a lot of paperwork that we would have to do if we were to decide to go in a different direction.
You're like the dude in Big Lebowski, various paperwork, business papers.
I've got stacks here of all the 213. I did not imagine when I started putting up little blog posts about the Clippers in 2011. I did not imagine that it would end with me learning how to do my own small business taxes. But here we are.
Well, you're in luck because I think TurboTax has something to do with Intuit Dome. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity for a little spot. I mean, call me, guys. Call me.
He is Lucas Hann. Don't call him Han. I always have to remind myself of that all the time. Owner, proprietor of 213 Hoops for now. Hey, the Clippers never changed their name. Why does 213 Hoops have to? It just tells you they've been doing it from that point. There's a history there. They have a long established run of great Clippers coverage. Lucas, thank you so much for doing this. It was overdue, as I mentioned earlier, but I think we made up for some lost time here on Clippers Talk. Yeah. It was great to have you on. I love all your opinions and analysis. I'm a huge fan. So,
Adam, always a pleasure, man. Great. It's been great working with you. Great talking with you today. And like I said, this has been a really great series. I hope that Clippers fans and your listeners know, the other fan bases are not getting this type of all the voices brought together on one channel over the summer type of work. And it is having been doing this for over a decade, I know that these summer series are a grind. And Adam is putting in the grind for you guys. I have not been putting in the grind this August. So appreciate Adam for what he's doing for y'all.
I'm just hanging out and having great guests on. Speaking of, tomorrow we have Jack Cogan coming on at Jack Clips LA is where you might know him from X. He's coming on. He's an ESPN reporter, and he's been a long-time Clippers fan. So we'll have him on, and maybe it'll air tomorrow night. Maybe it'll air on Tuesday. Wednesday, I teased out last week and then didn't deliver. Undersell, over-deliver. I keep forgetting. I didn't have that guest on Friday, that super secret special guest. I'm just going to jinx it even further now and give out the guy's name because he's supposed to come on Wednesday. If he doesn't, it's all good because he's a very busy man. It'll happen at some point. But the reason I'm telling you now is if you have questions for Paul Scheer, comedian and super fan of the Clippers, Paul Scheer will be joining me on Wednesday. I have a ton of questions for him, but if you guys want to get some in, put it in the comment section below. Subscribe and save. I'm really excited for that. And then I have some further news. I'm going on assignment for an interview coming up in a couple of weeks here, but I'm going to tease that out a little bit further. Anyways, a lot happening here on Clippers Talk. For Lucas Hann, don't call him on. I'm Adam Oslin. This has been another edition of Clippers Talk. We'll talk to you tomorrow.